Hey, welcome back to the pod. Thanks so much for tuning in, whoever's listening to this. I hope you're doing really, really well. This is the first episode that I'm recording since releasing my first 2 episodes. And if you're listening to this, episode 3 will also be out now, so go and check that out if you haven't already. Feels very weird to have had this little project leave the privacy of my own flat, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to anybody who's reached out, sent me a message, left me positive feedback, sent me support, or followed me on any of my platforms. It's meant the world to know that people have gotten some value out of this already, or that people have found it beneficial. The little kid in me who thought at one point that the world might be a better place without her is feeling extremely happy and overwhelmed with the sort of love and support I've received, and very healed this week. So if you're one of those people, thank you so much. And thank you for listening. If you're listening to this right now, it really does mean everything. Last week, I talked about the concepts of self-care and self-love and why they're both so important, but especially from a perspective of how they make you a better person for yourself and others. I didn't talk a lot about, or at all really, about how to practice either of them. And so this week, I'm going to talk about how to practice self-care specifically, as well as some of the misconceptions that I think put a lot of people off taking it seriously or realising that it's relevant to them and everybody. I think when a lot of us think about self-care, and certainly I used to think about it this way, when somebody mentioned self-care to me, what would come to mind would be videos that I'd seen of bubble baths and elaborate skincare routines and movie nights with ice cream, and it was all this stuff that was quite feminine coded and, you know, very girly pop, pink, lavish, had connotations of indulgence and potentially excessive spending, and that I would assume actually puts a lot of people off who aren't young girls or young women, or even women who don't feel like they identify with the lavish, girly pop coded, pink aesthetic lifestyle. I think self-care is something that is relevant to and important for everybody to practice. I do think a lot of the content about self-care online aims to be aesthetically pleasing as opposed to informative. And certainly I haven't come across a lot of people talking about the intention behind the self-care activities that we're choosing to do, and why knowing what the intention is behind them is equally as important as doing them, in my opinion. I also think it sometimes gets wrapped up with this idea of indulgence, and people associate self-care with spending excessively or buying luxurious or lavish products. But the purchasing and use of expensive or luxurious products alone is not self-care. Self-care is much less about the actual ritual or purchase or activity, and much more about the intention behind it and the desired effect. So, i.e. how you want to feel after partaking in that activity. If you have tried the bubble baths and the elaborate skincare routines, or the yoga classes, or any other mindfulness or self-care practice that you've seen online and been left feeling like you've been doing it wrong, or deflated or frustrated because it hasn't had the desired effect for you, it's probably because you're trying to copy somebody else's routine that is aiming to be aesthetic as opposed to actually recharging, and or you've not questioned whether that routine or activity is specifically relevant and beneficial to you. Without putting the required thought into the intention behind any self-care activity that you're engaging in, and deciding how you want to feel afterwards and what the benefit of it is going to be for you, it's not going to have the desired effect. It's not going to relieve your stress, it's not going to boost your mood, and it's not going to help you better cope with anything that you may be struggling with. Our self-care routines and rituals should be unique to us, because they should be constructed in order to meet our own unique needs and desires. So if you're just copying somebody else's aesthetic bath time routine or skincare routine, or going to a yoga or meditation class because the cool girls on social media do it, it's not going to do anything for you, and it's probably going to leave you feeling worse, because when we anticipate things to be a magic pill for our problems and then they fall short of solving them, it leaves us in a worse state than we were before. As the absolute queen of self-love, Tam Kaur herself said, self-care is a way of being not buying. She is an incredible content creator. She's mostly on YouTube, but she's got a podcast and obviously Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and everything as well. She creates a lot of content about helping specifically women to be more confident and live their best lives, but I think a lot of what she says and talks about is really applicable to everybody. So if you're looking for anybody else to check out after listening to this, then I would definitely recommend looking at some of her videos, specifically on self-love. Self-care to me means something that is going to replenish my tank in some way, be it physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, or a combination of any of these things. I think covering all these bases in a little way, semi-regularly, is going to be much more effective and conducive to our happiness, and it's probably going to keep us at a stabilised base emotional state much more effectively than having a spa day once every 2 months, or going on some lavish holiday once a year, or taking one night a week to binge watch your way through a Netflix series and a tub of ice cream. Now, I do want to say that self-care is amazing for leaving us feeling great and happy and relaxed, and it's brilliant if you can do it just for that sake and that sake alone. But I do think it is much more effective when you are pairing it with internal work, especially if there's something specific that you are struggling with, like internally and mentally, like a mindset issue or a limiting belief issue. The self-care is gonna replenish your energy tank, and it's gonna give you the fuel to be able to address those things, but it's not gonna give you the tools to address those things. Doing things to relax us and cheer us up and give us joy and comfort is only gonna go so far if we're not capitalising on the energy that gives us to address the things that are causing us the grief in the first place and making us crave more time for comfort and to relax. Doing the internal work is what's going to help us get to the root of the problems that are causing us to struggle, which then allows us to take action to change it. And once it's changed and worked on, the effects and benefits of the self-care and the relaxation are going to be much stronger and are going to go much further for us. I'm going to cover each category that I mentioned and list a few self-care activities that I think anybody can do, starting with the physical category. The most obvious thing in this one is doing exercise. You can cook yourself a good meal, which can also be mental and emotional self-care if it's something that you enjoy and can be mindful for you, and something that allows your brain to wander away from the problems or the tasks that you've been having to deal with for the rest of the day. Getting a great night's sleep is a great form of physical self-care, and drinking enough water. The emotional and mental category, I think there's a lot of overlap between them. I tend to think of the emotional category as things that directly make me feel happier or more replenished, whereas the mental category are things that expand and grow my mental capacity. The first one, and my absolute favourite for both of these categories, is walking. I think especially without headphones on, it can be a great mindfulness practice. It's invigorating, it's really good for emotional regulation because it decreases and brings down the intensity of our emotions, and it gives us space away from the stressors that are causing us distress and it allows us to gain objectivity and perspective and clarity on whatever issue we're tackling. Another really interesting thing that I learned about walking from Michael Smoke was that there are psychologists who have theorised that it can actually mimic EMDR therapy, which is a kind of therapy that uses rapid back and forth eye movement to reprocess traumatic memories. When we're walking, as long as our heads aren't literally like in our phones, we are continuously visually scanning our environment for threats. And when we do this and the scan comes back clear, there's no threats in the immediate environment, it sends a signal to our brain which tells us that we're safe, which calms the central nervous system and then boosts our mood. It works wonders for anxiety as well, which is why if somebody is super stressed and overwhelmed with something, it's a great idea to go for just a 5-minute walk, and they'll often come back finding that they feel even just a little bit calmer than they did before. So this is a practice that will leave us much better equipped to come back to the problems, the daily stresses that we're facing at work or home, and choose how to respond to them instead of reacting to them. Practicing gratitude is another huge one that I love to do. It's such an amazing form of emotional self-care for me, and I know that there are a lot of people who think that it's woo-woo shit and that it doesn't do anything, but it really does. Like, there's a scientific, physiological reason why it works and why it contributes to our happiness. Because when you are truly experiencing the emotional state of gratitude, you cannot simultaneously be experiencing the emotional state of anger or anxiety or stress or sadness, because gratitude regulates the sympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system is what's responsible for our anxiety response. So when you're experiencing the emotional state of gratitude and your sympathetic nervous system is regulated, it cannot then simultaneously trigger an anxiety response. You can't feel those two things at the same time. This is a daily practice for me. I write a gratitude list in the morning, I write one in the evening, literally just jot down 5 things that I'm grateful for, and I usually try to make sure that I write one thing that's internal, because I think you can get in the habit of just writing down like external things or possessions, and I think it can be really helpful to say, what about myself am I grateful for today? Like what qualities that I have, or what achievements have I made, or what emotional states have I experienced that I'm grateful for today. I also love to play the gratitude game with my boyfriend. It's really nice especially I think if we ever find ourselves stuck in a rut of complaining, or we've had a vent sesh that's gone like on a bit too long and has gone from being productive to unproductive, and like our moods are being brought down, or if either of us is in a glum mood and we're on a walk, like one of us will often say, right, let's play the gratitude game, and you just take it in turns to talk about things you're grateful for. And it can be really nice doing it with another person as well, because sometimes they say things that you would never have thought of, and then you're thinking about it and you're feeling grateful for it. It's just a great mood booster. And then the last form of emotional self-care that I wanted to mention is doing things that bring us hedonic happiness, which I'll explain in a minute. And then in terms of social self-care, this can be quite different things. Like, I think spending quality time with people who re-energize you and lift you up and leave you feeling seen and heard and valued can be an amazing form of self-care. But I think another great act of social self-care, in order to replenish your social battery, your social energy tank, is to take time to yourself and say no to things and dedicate time to spend literally just with you and your thoughts. I think those two things can be really great forms of self-care, and sometimes one will be necessary and sometimes the other will be. Obviously that list is nowhere near close to being exhaustive. Like, a lot of those are just things that I personally do with the intention of them being self-care activities. I know there are other things that benefit people massively, like stretching and yoga routines and forms of meditation and mindfulness, which can also have like amazing self-care benefits. I just don't do them personally. Like, I don't have extensive experience, like firsthand, of what the benefits are. But there are so many great different forms of self-care out there. Just notice that a lot of the things I just mentioned are what a lot of people would consider to be normal everyday activities, or chores even, like things like getting a good night's sleep, cooking yourself a good meal, going for a walk. These are all accessible, normal activities. They're not extravagant or luxurious or additional time consuming. I think there are so many things that we do every single day that we don't realise could be really powerful self-care activities, rituals and habits if we were setting the right intention with them. But just to summarise what I've been talking about here, it doesn't matter which or any of the activities that I've listed that you do, or whether you do any that weren't on that list. The specific activity or ritual doesn't matter. It's the intention behind why you're doing it, and being aware of the benefits that it's going to bring you specifically and personally. Now, on to hedonic and eudaimonic happiness. Psychologically speaking, there are 2 types of happiness. There's hedonic, which is doing things that give us pleasure for the sake of pleasure's sake. Things like the Netflix binges and eating comfort foods and buying expensive purchases like nice clothes or skincare products or bath products. Those are all examples of hedonic happiness. And then eudaimonic happiness is anything related to the pursuit of meaning and purpose and contentment. So things like deep work on a project that we're deeply passionate about and has meaning to us, that would lead us to eudaimonic happiness. Doing things that bring us hedonic happiness can be a great form of self-care, because they bring us comfort and joy, which replenishes our fuel tank. There's an episode that Mel Robbins did on her podcast about comfort and the importance of coming back to our comfort zone after pushing ourselves and working on ourselves and creating change in our lives. And I'll link it in my bio to this episode if anybody wants to go and give it a listen, but she used this really cool rubber band analogy to help explain why pursuing comfort and pleasure are actually really important. If you think of yourself as a rubber band, when you are challenging yourself daily and you are putting in hard work, or you're going through life changes, which are stresses on my brain, or you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you're putting in the hard work, you are stretching your rubber band like continuously. And eventually there comes a point when we have to like snap back to our comfort zone, because otherwise if you keep like stretching and pulling at a rubber band, like it's going to snap, which is burnout essentially. So creating moments of comfort for ourselves and engaging in self-care allows us to reset, refuel, and come back to a point where we're comfortable and we're reinvigorated and empowered to stretch ourselves again. And obviously the more regularly you do this, like even if it's just in little ways, the more you reduce the risk of pushing yourself too close to snapping point and unintentionally breaking. And once you've snapped and you've broken, you stop being able to grow and achieve things and work hard completely. So there is a direct relationship between being able to push yourself and grow and achieve, and the absolute necessity of regularly engaging in self-care and doing things that bring you comfort. She had a psychiatrist speak briefly on that episode, and the example he gave was so cute. It was about little kids on the playground and how sometimes you see young children like run off from their caregiver, their parent, and they'll toddle away and they'll explore the playground and they'll play and they'll chat to other children, and then every now and again they like run back to mummy or daddy or the caregiver and they grab their legs or they hide behind them. And that is them like touching in with home base, because when we're kids, ideally our caregiver acts as our home base. So coming back to us tells us that we're safe, we're coming back to our comfort zone, we're de-stretching, and then once they've established that they're okay and they're comforted, they can go off and brave the world and explore again. They need that moment of grounding themselves before they're able to go out and push themselves out of their comfort zone. And we still need that as adults. Like, it's not going to look like running and hiding behind our parents anymore or clinging onto their legs, but we need to do things regularly that bring us back into our comfort zone and let us know that we're safe and that we're okay and we're grounded, so that we continue to be able to grow and push ourselves. And because of that, I think it's really useful to make a list mentally, but even better physically, of things that make you feel relaxed and refueled and comforted and safe, and implement them into your life regularly, so that we're regularly touching back in with home base and spending even just a little bit of time back in our comfort zone. So doing things that bring us hedonic happiness, like the Netflix and the eating the comfort food, or the bubble baths if that's your thing, or the skincare routine, like those are all great forms of hedonic pleasure, and they can all be great ways to come back to our comfort zone and relax ourselves and tell ourselves that we are safe and comforted if they work for you. This is something that I really, really wish I could go back and tell myself 10 years ago, because I had this really ill-informed idea that to maximise my output and success and achievement, I had to work as many hours of a day as possible and just keep stretching and stretching and stretching. And then what happened is I would continuously be getting to snapping point and essentially forcing myself back into my comfort zone. And because my brain and body were forcing me there, I would overcompensate. So things that could have been healthy self-care activities, like watching TV or playing video games or eating cookies, became really unhealthy coping mechanisms because I was overcompensating with them. So I would end up getting super, super stressed and then having a day when I just couldn't face the world, couldn't face uni, couldn't face school, and I would just binge eat my way through packets of biscuits, and I would watch TV or end up playing The Sims for like upwards of 8 to 10 hours a day. It was a fear response, essentially. I think from my brain and body, it was scared of snapping. So the overcompensation was to like effectively get me back to this comfort zone. but the overcompensation then made those things harmful. And then because that was then causing additional stress, that I was eating so poorly or having binge eating periods and spending too much time doing these things that could have been relaxing, that was then causing me more problems, which meant that I wasn't getting the full benefits of coming back to that comfort zone. Like, I was getting back to snapping point like almost just as quickly because it wasn't actually refueling or recharging me. So I was stuck in this loop of pushing myself too hard, overcompensating with unhealthy coping strategies instead of real self-care. So I was never being fully recharged anyway, but even if I had have been, I don't think I was aware of the fact that I needed to do something to address the root problem, which is why are you pushing yourself this much and why do you have this lack of understanding of how to actually optimize your output. So it was just this vicious circle. You know, my usage of them would make me feel more stressed, which would lead me to crave more comfort, and I would go back to the same unhealthy things, and it just went like around and around and around. So eating the comfort food and spending time on The Sims or watching TV could have been a really good form of finding hedonic happiness and self-care if I'd have regulated my use of them and not just been relying on them like when I'd reached snapping point. So they were never as fully recharging as real forms of self-care, like controlled usage of them, or exercise, or devoting time to my more fulfilling hobbies and friendships and interests would have been. Like, I probably would have been so much better off if I'd have planned for controlled pockets of time and consumption to enjoy them in, instead of doing what I was doing, which is saying, no, I'm like denying myself these things because they're not conducive to my productivity and success. So I would tell myself I couldn't have them even though I wanted pleasure for the sake of pleasure's sake and I wanted comfort. I would grind myself into the ground working, and then I would end up consuming them or partaking in them to a much higher degree than I ever would have intended if I'd have just let myself use them healthily. It's something that I've been working really hard on recently, and to be honest, I'm really proud of the progress I've made with it, because historically, carving out time for myself and for pleasure's sake has not been something that I've been really good at, but I am really intentional and proactive with incorporating self-care into my life regularly now. So I'm consistently touching on all of those bases, so physical, mental, emotional, social, hedonic and eudaimonic. I exercise, I'm really careful with my sleep schedule and making sure I'm getting enough sleep. I regularly enjoy cooking meals for myself. I journal, I engage in gratitude practices. I have this podcast. It's a great form of eudaimonic happiness for me. It brings me a lot of fulfillment and contentment and a sense of some sort of small meaning. In terms of hedonic happiness, my favourite little rituals are, I do actually love bubble baths. Having said at the start of this episode that self-care isn't just about the feminine coded bubble bath. Like, for me, that is what I enjoy. The skincare, not so much. Like, I've tried that and it didn't work for me. Like, I just found it boring. Like, I may as well have been brushing my teeth. So that's not something that I invest time and money into. But bubble baths, I just use supermarket own brand bubble bath. I will take 20 minutes and I have to be really strict with myself with this. I do not let myself take a non-fiction book in, because that would be my instinct, is to get something that I can learn from on a highlighter and to use that time to be learning, because instinctively I'm still trying to get myself out of the pattern of thinking, what could you be doing productive in this moment? Like, I think that is something that has been ingrained in me for so long. So I know that it's going to be a long process to completely get out of that. But I think the fact that, like, I'm actively trying and putting so much effort into moving away from it is such a huge amount of progress in itself. So I don't let myself do that, and I take a fiction book in, and even though often I'm like, oh, I could be using this time for something better, like I could be learning, actually when I'm in my bath and I'm reading something, like, just for the sake of enjoyment, like, I get so much out of it. And those 20 minutes go so far because it is something that is personal to me. Like, it has specific benefits to me. I've tried it, it works for myself. I'm not trying to do something because somebody else has made it look good and said it works for them. And also have little things that I do in a week, like on Tuesdays I'll go and get myself a matcha at a coffee shop and I'll get it with syrup, and yeah, I could make it cheaper myself at home, but I enjoy the experience of going out to a cafe and having somebody make it for me and being able to walk with it, and like that in itself is a good enough reason to do it. Like if you enjoy something and it brings you pleasure, like carve out active time for that. So to summarize what I've said today, I think the two biggest pitfalls with trying to engage in self-care are A, trying to copy something that somebody else is doing that you don't actually enjoy or get any comfort or revitalizing benefits from, and B, treating self-care as a substitute for inner work and addressing the roots of the stresses in your life. If you can get really clear and specific on the intentions behind your chosen self-care practices, what you want to achieve from them, so how you want to feel afterwards, and making sure that you're covering your physical, mental, emotional, social, hedonic and eudaimonic needs in little ways regularly, and pairing it with the internal work, capitalizing off of the energy that it gives you and then using it to address the stresses in your life and engage in positive change. If you're managing to do all three of those things, I don't think you can go wrong. I will do a whole episode on the internal work that I think we should all be doing to follow on from this, but I know that's something that's going to take me quite a bit more time to put together, and like I know there are bits of research that I still want to do, and I've had a pretty busy week this week gone, and I know that I've got lots of stuff coming up, so having just recorded a whole episode on self-care and balance, I think it's going to be sensible for me to do something that's going to not be as additionally time consuming for next week's episode. That's where I'm going to end this for today. Thank you so much if you've gotten to this point. I really hope something that I said was of use to you today. If you would like to follow or subscribe or leave me a star rating, that would be super helpful in helping me like push this out there and get it across to more people, because ideally I would love this to reach as many people as possible so that the people who could really benefit from it can find it. I'd really welcome any feedback, positive or negative, so if you want to leave me a comment, or you can send me a message on my Instagram or TikTok. The social media side of this, so the Instagram and the TikTok as opposed to the podcast, is very much work in progress at the moment. I think the podcast is something that I found relatively easy in comparison to get going. Like I'm not quite sure what kind of content I want to be making yet in terms of what form it's going to be. Like obviously I know what I want to talk about and what message I want to get out, but I'm not quite sure how to translate that into like the bite-sized format that Instagram and TikTok is more suited to. So thank you so much if you're already following me on either of those, and hopefully there's going to be lots more value on those for you soon, but I'm working it out as I go along. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day and an amazing week, and hopefully I'll speak to you next time. Bye.